From IdeaStream Public Media, I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for being with us today. The world of sports betting in Ohio has been shaken up. Last week, beloved Cleveland Guardians pitchers Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz pleaded not guilty to federal charges related to allegedly rigging bets on specific pitches during Major League Baseball games. They're accused of being paid off to throw certain pitches so gamblers could win hundreds of thousands of dollars. Because of this, regulators have changed the rules for these micro-prop bets on professional baseball games. Today, we're talking through these changes in our new Law of the Land series, which explores how the law affects every facet of our daily lives. And it's a doubleheader, as later in the show, we'll explore another legal issue, explaining those Cleveland municipal income tax audit notices that surprised so many people recently. First up, we're looking at similar betting issues that have popped up in both the NBA and the NFL, as well as what we've talked about in Major League Baseball, and the evolution of sports betting in our state, which has only been legally available to gamblers in Ohio for about 2 years now. Joining us for this conversation in studio, we have Eric Chaffee, law professor at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Eric, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us by phone, we have Joe Scalzo, who is a sports business journalist for Crain's Cleveland Business. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Stephanie.
Also by the phone from Washington, D.C., we have Joe Maloney, Senior Vice President of Strategic Communications for the American Gaming Association, which is a trade group that represents sports betting companies. Joe also worked in the NFL as Vice President of Public Affairs for the Washington Commanders. Joe Maloney, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stephanie.
I'd like to let everyone know I am also a licensed attorney in the state of Ohio and California. And in today's show, we will be examining the law, not necessarily giving legal advice. If you would like to join the conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org, or you can send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Now, Joe Maloney, I'll start with you for the first question. We're talking about sports betting, and we're talking about prop bets and micro prop bets. So can you explain these two types of sports betting?
No, not a problem. So a prop bet is a bet or a wager placed on, the easiest way to describe it is an individualized outcome. So a straight bet would be a bet on which team would win or lose the game. A prop bet is not necessarily tied to the outcome of the game, but an individual's performance. So in an example that is close to home, a prop bet would be on how many touchdown passes would the Cleveland Browns quarterback throw in a given game. And so they are tied to, again, something that would take place within a contest or within a match, and it is an individual statistic in most instances. An in-play bet, or what has become more colloquially known as a micro bet, is just another bet or a wager on something happening in the game. So that could be who will win the first quarter, which team will win the second quarter in terms of total points scored. It could also be a bet on the next play, the next golf shot, the next possession for a football team, or the number of strikeouts that might be had in the next inning. So that is basically wagers placed on activities within the game itself.
So, Joe Maloney, just to follow up on this, do you have to place a prop bet before a game starts, but you can place a micro bet while the game is underway?
You can place a prop bet before the game starts. You can place a prop bet in-game. You can be halfway through the game and the Cleveland Browns quarterback was injured yesterday. The backup quarterback came in. You wouldn't probably plan on a prop bet for the backup quarterback prior to the game starting, but during the game, Shedeur Sanders comes in, and then you could place a prop in-game on his performance, a touchdown pass or a rushing touchdown pass is one example. So the only difference between an in-play bet / micro bet and a prop wager is simply that an in-play bet just happens within the game, within the time the contest or match begins and before it ends. And then a prop bets can exist both in play and prior to the game as well.
Okay, thank you for breaking that down for us. Now, Joe Scalzo, from the indictment against Clase and Ortiz, tell us what they're accused of doing, which they did plead not guilty to, and what penalty they could face from Major League Baseball. Right now, as I understand it, they're still suspended with pay.
Mm-hmm. So they're accused of conspiring with sports bettors to rig those prop bets, and specifically in this case, intentionally throwing certain types of pitches, like a ball instead of a strike, or a pitch that's at a slower speed than usual. And I'll give you two examples. There was a game against the Red Sox in April, and they accused Clase of talking to a sports bettor before the game, and said that he would throw a pitch slower than, I think it was somewhere around 98 miles an hour, and he did, and the bettor and his friends made about $11,000. And then there's another game against the Dodgers in May where he agreed to throw a ball, and it ended up that the guy swung and missed, and so it ended up being called a strike, even though he clearly threw it in the dirt. So it just those types of like individualized micro bets that are really easy to bet on and maybe don't affect the game overall, and but they're certainly very dangerous. And when you talk about the potential punishment, everybody kind of knows about Pete Rose and his lifetime ban for betting on games as a manager. But baseball is very clear. Even after legalized gambling came to America, like if you look at the policy, the first paragraph is underlined and in bold, saying that if you violate anything in this contract, you are facing up to a permanent ban from Major League Baseball. And I think it's going to be a very interesting test case, because obviously when Pete Rose got his ban, betting was illegal, period. Whereas now, like, all these teams are obviously in bed with these sports books and these companies, and they're taking money for them. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how MLB handles it. But I think at minimum, you're seeing they'll let the legal process play out, because these guys might be facing jail time before they even face anything from the leagues.
And let's talk about that now. Eric, I'll turn to you. What are the federal charges that they face and the possible sentences there?
Yeah, they're both currently facing 4 charges. The first off basically is wire fraud. The idea that they defrauded investors, and as a result of that, should be punished. There's honest services fraud in addition to that, which is the claim that they owed a duty of honest services to the Guardians, and by actually not pitching as well as they should have, that they violated that. There's also a sports betting charge in Title 18, which is the criminal provisions of the federal law. There are specific crimes that one can commit if you are engaged in certain sorts of bad activity related to gambling. And then finally, in addition to that, you have a money laundering charge, which might seem like kind of an odd charge, but it's not uncommon when a prosecutor actually brings a charge to include things like money laundering, because it probably is occurring because people are trying to hide the fact that they may have ill-gotten gains. But even beyond that, it gives another way of potentially punishing the bad behavior. There's jail time associated with all of these. There's fines associated with all of these. And as mentioned, the individual leagues regulate gambling behavior as well. And under Rule 21, we know that potentially these players are facing actually being banned from the game permanently.
So when we're talking about the possible sentences there, what's on the table? How many years could they spend in prison if they're found guilty of these things?
So there's mention of up to 20. It's a fairly serious offense. I mean, it's the national pastime. It's one of those things that's captured the popular imagination. And as a result of that, there are laws on the books that really have serious charges behind them that, this is meant to be something serious that communicates to players, and people affiliated with these teams just don't do this.
Do you have any idea, Eric, when we might see resolution of this case, or when we might see it go to trial?
That's a great question. I mean, sometimes the wheels of justice work quickly, but, often it takes a while. So, as a result of that, there's going to be a lot of maneuvering here. Both of these individuals are well represented. They know that, this is their livelihood at stake. They know, in addition to that, that, they may be facing jail time and substantial penalties. So as a result of that, it could take a while. It's not one of those things where we're going to end up getting an outcome immediately unless they decide that they want to settle this case. Probably with this, because it's so high profile, the government feels that they have a good case. So we could see a settlement, but even that may take a while.
So Eric, if sports betting is a state issue, which we know it just became legal here in Ohio less than 2 years ago, why are Clase and Ortiz facing federal charges?
Well, I mean, it is a state issue, meaning that, ultimately it is regulated at the state level. There was a Supreme Court case in 2018 that invalidated the federal law on that. With that said, really, if you want to sue anybody for anything, you're going to be able to find a reason. There are lots of things that are contained within Title 18 of the United States Code. And we have what's known as a dual sovereignty doctrine in the sense that we could see charges on the state level, we could see charges on the federal level as well. And what's going on here is in addition to potentially violating what's regulated on the state level, there are also concerns about whether or not fraud and money laundering have occurred as well.
Okay, let's talk now about sports betting regulation. I'll stay with you, Eric, on this first. Tell us what regulation will change because of this, and what were the rules before? How will we see difference in betting in professional baseball now?
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, as you mentioned, this was previously regulated on the federal level. We have the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, which was passed in 1992, and what it meant is that there were only 4 states that actually were allowed to have sports betting because they were grandparented in. Nevada, obviously, Delaware, Oregon, Montana. And that was invalidated in 2018. And what we saw is Ohio making a move to allow for sports betting. The concern is with these prop bets, these micro prop bets that were discussed by other commentators, that ultimately they allow for too much temptation, too much easy manipulation of betting. And there's been a real push by Governor DeWine, in fact, to render these types of prop bets unlawful, or at least to limit them. He wanted regulation. He wanted law initially. It seems like now that we've seen these concerns with Ortiz and Clase, that Major League Baseball and other leagues are willing to work with Ohio on limiting sports betting. So we may not actually see regulation. We may just see from Ohio, we may actually just see new rules come out of the leagues and new rules come out of the sports books to make sure that this type of behavior doesn't go on, or it's limited. The potential for basically abuse of the betting system is limited.
And so what's been talked about, just to make everyone aware, is a $200 betting limit on baseball prop wagers focused on individual pitches. And also individual pitch bets now prohibited from being included in parlays. So if you're making a bet and then winning more money is contingent on something else, that's a parlay. I know Joe Maloney will correct me if I'm saying something wrong there. I want to remind everyone that we're talking about sports betting and changes to sports betting in light of the federal indictments against Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz, which they have pleaded not guilty to. If you have a question or a comment, you can call us at 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org. And I'll ask Joe Maloney now. We did see a quick response with that change from regulators after the indictments came down, and sports betting companies were part of that conversation. So what can you tell us about that thinking in limiting these specific types of bets in Major League Baseball?
Yeah, and Eric appropriately characterized what the changes to be expected forthcoming. It's actually not a change in regulation. And this is a reflection of actually legal market operators who are in business with professional leagues. And as part of those partnerships, there's a lot of agreements and there's a lot of duties and obligations that come with being recognized as an official sportsbook provider for a given professional league. And there's really 2 things that are afforded beyond just the revenue partnership. 1 is transparency, and 2 is collaboration. Transparency exists in the form of full sharing of information, particularly with regard to betting patterns. So when outsized bets are placed on any type of particular wager, that activity can be reported. That activity can be observed. It can be captured. And in instances such as what took place with the 2 Cleveland Guardians pitchers, it was legal sportsbooks that identified aberrational activity on those 2 pitchers and certain specific types of wagers being placed on their individualized performances. So when legal sportsbooks flag that activity, it goes to an independent integrity monitor, which is nearly and universally in all jurisdictions throughout the United States, mandated by regulation to have that relationship. The Integrity Monitor provides that information to the league. The leagues then decide to conduct an investigation, and when there's potential criminal activity, law enforcement is brought in. So what you see in this example is the full transparency and then the collaboration that takes place in pursuing this type of activity. And as Eric pointed out, these types of punishments and these types of incidences, when they take place, it's certainly a sad day for sports fans, but it most overwhelmingly will serve as a deterrent because of the punishments that will likely ensue. However, I'll just go back to your question specifically, and really what that entails is a process where these legal sports books come together with the leagues and they decide, all right, we are identifying areas that are potentially vulnerable for manipulation, and what can we do to enhance and preserve integrity? Integrity matters so much right now. If integrity, or if fans believe the competition to be rigged, they're not going to watch the games on television, they're not going to buy the tickets, they're not going to buy the jerseys, they're not going to be fans. And similarly, if bettors think the outcome is rigged, they certainly will not be betting. So this is an opportunity for leagues and for official sportsbooks to come together and say, wait, what can we do better? How can we improve the system? And an agreement that was announced last week, and absolutely with appropriate scrutiny from Governor DeWine and other regulators in the state of Ohio, as well as in other jurisdictions, have said, hey, can we do better? We're seeing this in the NBA as well, Stephanie. Over a year ago, official sportsbooks in the NBA announced no more prop bets on players on 2-way or 10-day contracts. And that was in response to an incident with Toronto Raptors forward Jontay Porter. They also don't allow for prop bets on things such as missed free throws and turnovers in a game. And similarly, the NFL does the same thing. They don't allow prop bets on things like missed field goals, where one individual can easily affect the outcome of that activity.
Now, Eric mentioned this, and Joe Maloney, I want to follow up with you on this. When the allegations were first made public, Governor Mike DeWine did call for a complete ban on prop betting in sports in Ohio. And then he did walk that back, as we did learn that Major League Baseball and the Ohio Casino Control Commission and also sports betting companies had come together to come to this mutually agreed upon solution. So why do you think that happened with Governor DeWine walking back that call for a complete ban on this?
I can't speak specifically to the governor and his team and his motivation, but certainly the governor deserves quite a bit of credit for, I think, bringing a lot of people to the table, to use that term, to figure out what can be done to preserve and enhance integrity. In the final statement that Major League Baseball issued, he joined official sportsbooks and the commissioner in commending this. I think he believes that ultimately, at the end of the day, when legalized, this is the type of transparency and collaboration that can move forward. The Ohio regulators are a very, very serious and very progressive set of individuals when it comes to protecting college athletes specifically, and when it comes to setting up a legal gaming marketplace across all verticals of gaming that represents integrity, that represents fairness, and that represents accountability to the state. And so I also think Governor DeWine's comments are a reflection of the trust he has in the Ohio Casino Control Commission and the team of regulators there who hold legal sportsbooks, the members of the AGA, to account and to fulfill all duties and obligations that come with licensure. Our licenses are not granted in perpetuity in the state of Ohio, nor are they in any jurisdiction. We come up for renewal, and we have to go through additional background checks, and we have to ensure that we are stewarding that license in an appropriate manner. And so I think the governor is reflecting his faith and his commitment to the regulatory system in his own state.
We have a question now from Tom, who emailed in, and I'll direct this question to Eric. Tom asks, do we, the fans, have an opportunity here to file a class action lawsuit against Class A, the Guardians, or Major League Baseball for defrauding ticket holders and subscribers of the MLB app for the games which were affected by Class A and Ortiz's actions?
That's a great question. I mean, you can sue anybody for anything, but it doesn't mean you're going to win. Probably not, meaning that in instances where you have a claim related to some sort of fraud, you have to prove reliance on an individual basis. So it's extremely unlikely there would be a class certification there. I mean, that being said, I do think the fans in this particular instance should feel as though they've been cheated. And I think that's part of the reason why, I think Joe is alluding to this, that there's a real interest on the part of the gaming industry of fixing this. There's a real interest on the part of the state government. There's a real interest on the part of the sports leagues, because it's in everybody's interest to make sure that the fan feels like they get a fair experience. So probably not in terms of bringing class action, but at the same time, if I was a fan, and I am a fan, I would be concerned about this getting cleaned up.
Let's go to Joe Scalzo now, and we'll talk about something similar that came up recently in the NBA with Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier, who actually played high school basketball for Shaker Heights. So, Joe Scalzo, let us know what happened there.
Yeah, Joe Maloney kind of just referenced the fact that a lot of this policing is being done by sports books, and in this case, this dates back to 2023 when he was playing for the Charlotte Hornets, and multiple sports books kind of flagged some unusual activity around betting. He had taken himself out of a game with less than 10 minutes into it. He usually plays the whole game, and they bet on unders that he would score less than his season average on points and assists and rebounds and so forth. So the sports books flagged that, and I think something like $263,000 was bet all overall on individual prop bets or parlays. So obviously very suspicious, but it's interesting because it happened in March of 2023, and it really didn't get acted upon, although the NBA investigated it, but it didn't get acted upon until this year.
And Joe Maloney, you touched on this a bit with some of the limits that we've seen in the NBA, but I'll ask you now, what kind of a reaction are you seeing to what happened there?
Well, again, another sad day for sports fans, and in particular fans of the NBA. And so I think you're seeing two responses. One, U.S. Attorney Nacella and FBI Director Patel made it very clear that sports books were a key part of the law enforcement and investigation process that ensued and that took place in the wake of legal sports books identifying this activity with Terry Rozier nearly 2 years ago. And second, you're beginning to see again what we just discussed with the MLB, the NBA, and the official sports books coming together and saying, okay, what are the things that we can be doing better? How can we continue to partner in such a way that promotes and enhances integrity? And I think one of the things that I would point out, Stephanie, is, when I worked at the NFL, you had mandated employee training on the NFL's commercial gambling policy. Every professional league right now, post 2018, has a gambling policy for its club executives, for its team employees, and for the players. And the agreements with the players are enshrined in collective bargaining agreements that exist between those leagues and the player unions. Rules have to be followed. And a lot of times what I hear is, I never used to hear about these types of suspensions before, and now that sports betting is legal, I hear about it all the time. That's because we have these agreements in place. That's because there are rules now. Prior to 2018, it was just a blanket prohibition. But now we have far more attention being paid to this. And what do some of those partnerships look like? There's basically a no-fly list, a no-bet list that is shared between the leagues and the sports books. And so as part of the club that I was an employee of, we had mandatory training every fall. You knew all of the rules. We had different types of seminars for rookies when they would come into training camp, other types of symposiums for the players, so everybody understood the policy. And now for 2 years and back-to-back years, the NFL has announced 0 suspensions under its NFL gambling policy. Other leagues have similar responsibilities to invest in education, to invest in culturally relevant education, so everyone is aware of the risks and the rules that now need to be followed. And it extends to all types of social circles. What might be a common sharing of information by someone on the training staff to a friend, it could potentially lead to insider or non-public information. These are the types of things we see in securities markets. These are the types of things we read about on Wall Street, right? Insider trading. We bring that same examination and same scrutiny now to the betting relationships between sportsbooks and the leagues so that all these rules can be followed and integrity can be enhanced. So that's a lot of the conversation right now with all of these leagues in the wake of these 2 incidences in separate leagues. Hey, what can we be doing to communicate more and tell everybody about these rules and ensure these rules are being followed?
I want to remind our audience that we're talking about sports betting and changes to sports betting in light of the recent federal indictments against Guardians pitchers Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz, who both have pleaded not guilty to the charges against them. Maybe you're someone who participates in sports betting and you have a question or a comment about this particular scandal. If so, or you have any other comment or question you'd like to share to be a part of the conversation, you can give us a call at 866 578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org. And Joe Scalzo, I'll go to you now. The NFL has had its own betting issues. Can you remind us what happened? Beloved Browns quarterback Bernie Kosar, who had liver transplant surgery this morning, and we're hoping that that's gone very well. There was a sports betting issue when sports betting first went live here in Ohio in 2023. So remind us about that, please.
Yeah, well, first I'll echo what you just said about Bernie. We're all hoping that he gets a good outcome. And what we're talking about here with Bernie, it seems almost quaint compared to the other two incidences. January 1st, 2023, that was the first day that Ohio had legalized sports betting. Bernie was working with a media company called Big Play, and he placed a $19,000 wager on the Browns to beat the Steelers in the following week's game. And obviously the 19,000 refers to his jersey number 19. And he was working with the Browns as their a radio pregame broadcast employee. And the league has a gambling policy, and so the Browns say they were required to fire him. And Bernie kind of said that he was contractually required to make and so it kind of became a big to do. But again, it compared to what we're talking about with Terry Rozier and Emmanuel Clase, it seems very late.
And Joe Maloney, you worked with the NFL with the Washington Commanders. So can you tell us, why is what Bernie did there, why was that a problem for the NFL?
So it's just a pretty clear policy. If you are employed by the club, there is a blanket prohibition on all forms of betting. So even with the NFL, if you are a club employee, you cannot walk on a casino floor, you cannot walk into a sports book, you cannot place any bet, you cannot participate in a fantasy contest where the winnings are more than $200. They're all rules, and that's a condition of employment in the NFL. And there's mandatory trainings that each club has to certify and ensure full compliance with participation in those trainings. And so those are in place to, again, preserve and enhance integrity. They want the integrity of these competitions, of these matches, of these contests, of these games to be unquestioned. And so that's why that policy is in place.
And Eric, I'll ask you now, Bernie didn't necessarily break the law, but you mentioned that these entities, they regulate themselves as well. So why did he still lose his job?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, ultimately here, he was doing the Browns pregame show. He had a relationship with the Browns, and with the NFL rules, you're just not allowed to place a bet. So your employer can have very different rules and even harsher rules than what you find in regard to the law. So, here, Bernie Kosar, there's no evidence that he was trying to flout, the regulations of the NFL or the law or anything. He wasn't convicted of anything. He got basically ended up being fired based on his employer's policies. And, as a result of that, it just shows that, the leagues are very serious about making sure that it's a clean game. It's evidence of the fact that, through self-regulation, you also can see regulation of this behavior even beyond the federal and the state government.
Mm-hmm. We have an email now from Mike, and Mike says, I believe proponents of legalized betting argue that it would reduce illegal betting, which has no controls and is connected with crime and violence. Has our experience so far borne that out? And I'll direct that question to Joe Maloney to tell us how legalized gambling, how that has maybe changed or interacted with the existence of illegal gambling.
Continues to be a battle, in short, but it's an important question. Prior to 2018,
I think we may have lost Joe Maloney there. We'll try to get him reconnected so that we can get an answer to that question. And while we're doing that, Eric, I'll ask you about sports prop betting in college sports here in Ohio. That's something that is already not permissible. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's one of those things where different sports, different leagues, professional versus college, really there's a need for different types of regulation. When it comes to prop betting, there's a lot of possibility for manipulation on the part of athletes and a lot of temptation on the part of athletes who may not be making a tremendous amount of money. So, the decision was made on the college level basically to ban prop betting as a way of making sure that those games are kept clean.
I think we have Joe Maloney back now. So, Joe, I'll ask you if you could continue what you were saying about illegal betting and whether legalized betting has been able to tamp down some of the issues with illegal betting.
Apologies, Stephanie. So prior to 2018, there were some gaming consortiums and public health organizations that sized the illegal sports betting market at about $150 billion annually. And that's a pretty shocking number. However, it does speak to the fact that as long as there have been sports to bet on, Americans have been betting on sports. We've done a decent job migrating some of those bettors out of the illegal market and into the legal market. And a lot of that is because of, yes, the expansion of legalized wagering, bringing in some new bettors, but also because of things like advertising, which many of your listeners probably complain about because it's the one thing we continue to hear a lot from the general public and from stakeholders as well. But that advertising is important. So in recent estimate that we commissioned, Stephanie, we've sized the illegal market for sports betting at $84 billion. So we've cut into that significantly. And there's really two pieces that are really important to that. One, the promotion of legalized sports wagering, regulators, elected stakeholders really being invested in providing for a safe environment where consumers are protected, and some of these rules come into play that preserve and enhance integrity. And then second, continuing efforts at the regulatory level, both in the states as well as the federal government, to root out these offshore sports books, predominant offshore in locales in the Caribbean and Curacao and abroad that have slick websites that target Americans. They show up in Google search results. And so regulators and the federal government are applying a lot of pressure through cease and desist orders, kicking these folks out of their states and developing their own public awareness campaigns to keep the general public from being duped into accessing these illegal websites. But it continues to be a battle, and the proliferation of the illegal market likely will continue, but we're doing everything we can to decrease their levels of participation with the general public, with the betting public.
As we circle back to a comment from before, we'll kind of wrap things up with this thought from Eric. I want to ask you, Eric, if you can explain to people, it was the Ohio's Casino Control Commission and Major League Baseball and sports betting companies that came together to talk about these changes to betting in Major League Baseball that we're seeing as a result of the Clase and the Ortiz indictment. So why was it that group and why was it not Ohio's legislature?
It's one of those things that before you get to the legislature, sometimes you're dealing with regulatory agencies and sometimes you're dealing with negotiation amongst the people who might be regulated. And, as a result of that, sometimes you can solve things on a much smaller level than trying to actually get legislation pushed through. And often, if you can get people to discuss things and really talk about things, sometimes it can create a tailored solution that's hard to create through legislation. And that's what we saw in this particular instance. Everybody realized there was a problem. Everybody realized they had an interest in solving it, and they came together, which is probably part of the reason why Governor DeWine said, well, okay, we don't actually need legislation at least right now here. We can allow people to, or these different entities to work things out.
Okay, that's all the time that we have for this part of the conversation today. Eric Chaffee, law professor with Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Thanks for being with us here in studio.
Thank you.
And on the phone, we have Joe Maloney, Senior Vice President of Strategic Communications with the American Gaming Association. Joe, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
And Joe Scalzo, sports business journalist with Crain's Cleveland Business. Joe, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
If anyone is listening who may have a problem or know someone who has a problem or needs some help, we want to share the number for the National Problem Gambling Helpline. That's 1-800-522-4700. That's operated by the National Council on Problem Gambling. And a direct line to Ohio's Problem Gambling Helpline is 1-800-589-9966. We have to take a break now. When we come back, are you a Cleveland resident or someone who works in Cleveland who received one of those green tax audit forms recently? We'll try to answer your questions about what those forms mean when we are back here on The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. Stay with us. You were with The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, over the last several months, people who live and work in Cleveland got surprising notices in the mail from the Central Collection Agency, CCA, which is part of the City of Cleveland's Division of Taxation. The notices warned recipients that they may have received income which is subject to Cleveland's income tax and asked them to submit income tax returns and other forms that many people had never heard of before. Some people reported being told they owe the city of Cleveland hundreds of dollars in fines for not filing taxes properly, even if the taxes owed were withheld from their paychecks. Now, in this edition of our legal series, Law of the Land, we're sharing the details behind how Cleveland municipal income taxes work and why these letters may have been set out. So with me to do this, we have Dr. Mary Shashmas, Assistant Professor of the Department of Accountancy at Case Western Reserve University's Weatherhead School of Management. Mary, thanks for being with us.
Of course. Happy to be here.
Now, if you would like to join the conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can email us at soi@ideastream.org, or you can send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Now, let's set the stage here, Mary, as we start. Can you explain the players when it comes to Cleveland's municipal income tax? Because the notices that we referenced here, they recently came out from CCA, but there's also RETA, and it's confusing. So what are the players when it comes to Cleveland municipal income tax?
So in the city of Cleveland, well, maybe we should back it up and look at sort of the regional level.
Sure.
Or maybe even the state level. If you live or work in the state of Ohio, chances are you may owe taxes to, say, 3 levels of authority. Income tax, let's focus on income tax. Federal, we all kind of are comfortable with that. State of Ohio, and then city. So you could owe taxes, income taxes, on the city in the city where you work, as well as the city where you live. And so if we think about the players, we've got the workers or self-employed individuals, and then we have the employers, and then obviously the taxing authorities.
Okay, so what's the difference between CCA and RETA?
Okay, so RETA stands for Regional Income Tax Agency. And in Northeast Ohio, there's really 2 large central authorities that are processing income tax returns for multiple cities. So those 2 agencies are the Central Collection Agency, which Cleveland happens to be a part of, and the Regional Income Tax Agency, which has a number of other cities.
Okay. And these are independent agencies. These are part of government. What are they in terms of that? I know that the CCA is listed as part of the Division of Taxation in Cleveland.
It could be. I guess I don't know their legal standing, but they act as the processor for income taxes for those different agencies.
Okay.
So they're acting on behalf of the city that they are representing.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay. So we're talking about notices that recently came out from CCA, and this had a lot of people surprised and confused. Have you seen these notices that we're referencing before?
I haven't seen an actual notice of this one specifically, but I can imagine what they would probably look like.
So this is something that residents have seen before? This isn't necessarily the first time notices like these have gone out?
Right. Well, if the city believes they're owed taxes or owed even a return, then they may issue a notice saying, hey, you didn't file with us, or hey, we've received information that you've earned income in our region or in our jurisdiction. You owe us tax on that. And then they're asking you to either pay the tax or file your form to state or show that you don't owe.
Okay, I want to give us a concrete example that we can talk about here. When I first moved back to Northeast Ohio, I moved to downtown Cleveland, and I was working in downtown Cleveland. I was working at WKYC at the time. I had no idea that there was such a thing as Cleveland municipal income tax. Now, my employer withheld that money from my paycheck at the time. You know, I looked, I was able to see these taxes were paid, but I did eventually get a notice about filing these taxes, and at the time, I was living downtown and also working downtown. So is that typical? Do you get this notice? Do you have to live and work in Cleveland in order to get a notice that you might owe Cleveland municipal income tax?
No, I mean, if you live in Cleveland, then you need to file a return, whether you owe or not. The return will help you determine if you owe or not. If you've already had the taxes withheld while working in the city of Cleveland, then your return's really just going to present your income and what you've paid, and there shouldn't be any additional tax due, but you'd still owe the filing of the return.
So you have to file.
You have to
even
file in
though-
your residence,
Okay.
in your resident city.
All right. Now, say I work in downtown Cleveland, but I
Okay.
live in Lakewood, which I do happen to live in Lakewood.
Okay.
How does that work in terms of filing for the Cleveland municipal income tax?
Okay, so I believe that Lakewood is, has their own income tax processing center, or, if it was another city, they could be part of RETA, for example. If you work in the city of Cleveland, your employer is going to withhold taxes on the income you earn while working in the city of Cleveland, right? And then you really shouldn't have to file for CCA, but you would need to file in Lakewood. Now, if you received a notice, then you could file that return with CCA that simply states, I lived in this residency, my income earned in Cleveland was this is how much withholding there was, it should net out to zero, unless you had other income that taxes were not withheld on.
Okay, so really, it's about where you live is where you have to do your filing.
Right. But if you earned within a city, you technically owe city taxes there. So it's possible that you could have to file a return to CCA even though you don't live in a CCA city. For example, you're self-employed and there is no one doing any withholding for your on your income. So if you earned within the jurisdiction of a CCA city, then you owe you need to file that city return indicating the income that you earned within those jurisdictions and pay the tax to CCA. Then what happens is when you also then have to file in your resident city, and then when you file to your resident city, that city has the freedom. They've set their decision on whether they were going to give you credit for taxes that you've paid to other cities, so that potentially you don't have to double tax, right, in the different cities. But every city is going to have its own rule on how much credit they're going to give you for paying taxes, say, to the city of Cleveland or to any other city where you had withholdings.
Well, that tracks with my personal experience because I can tell you that I do have to file individually with the city of Lakewood and pay my residence tax to the city of Lakewood. But I'm already having that money withheld from working in downtown Cleveland. The Idea Center is here in downtown Cleveland in Playhouse Square. Okay, so let me ask you this, Mary. How have people historically been informed that they owe Cleveland municipal income tax?
Well, if for some reason the CCA has information suggesting that you've had income within a CCA city and you haven't filed a return, but they believe you owe a return or you owe taxes, then you'll get a notice. That's one way. A lot of times that's how people learn about the city taxes. Other times it's, working with a tax professional. You find out when you're doing your tax returns in April or October if you're using the extended deadline. But, a tax professional might tell you, you live in a city, we need to file also your city tax return.
I did also read that the city of Cleveland was letting people know on water bills, on a utility bill, potentially, about the municipal income tax, putting a notice out there. Of course, that can present a whole host of issues. Like, for example, say someone is a renter and their water bill is included in their rent, so they don't necessarily get a physical water bill. Are there any other ways that people might end up being surprised? I know you mentioned self-employed individuals.
Yeah, self-employed individuals are among those that are most likely to get a notice, because what would happen is if you receive a 1099 as a self-employed individual, so you did some work for a company or someone and they issued you a 1099 miscellaneous, or what's now called the 1099 NEC, non-employee compensation. That form is going to have the payer's name on it, which might have the city of Cleveland as their address. And so from CCA's perspective, they're seeing a 1099 that was issued from an employer within CCA. They may think, based on that information, that, this person has worked in the city of Cleveland, they owe us, or within a CCA city, they owe us a tax return and they may owe us tax. And that would most likely trigger a notice if you have not actually filed a return and owe there. And it's possible that you don't owe. It might be just that the employer's located there, but you did the work in some other city that was either non-taxing or even a RETA city or just somewhere else. And you would have to file that return, though, to show that you didn't work in the city of Cleveland. So no, you don't owe them the tax.
So that brings my next question to you about the pandemic, and if the pandemic plays into this round of notices at all. The letters were referencing 2021. We know that's a time when a lot of people who were previously coming to an office in downtown Cleveland were then working from home. So in that instance, you don't have to pay the Cleveland municipal income tax if you're working from home elsewhere outside of Cleveland and the home office is just in downtown Cleveland. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it really falls on employers should be tracking where their employees are working, right? And so if all work is done outside of that municipality, then just because the headquarters is located there doesn't mean that the tax is owed there. It's owed where the work is being done.
Okay. Now, what if your employer withheld these taxes from your paycheck, but you didn't file because you didn't know you had to file? You know, people have mentioned being notified that they may be subject to penalties or fees, even though the money was actually withheld and given to the city. So what happens there?
You can request or ask for the penalties to be waived if you have good reason. I've seen penalties waived before, give enough good reason. But if you've already said I didn't know about it 1 year and then the next year you do that again, you probably won't get the relief for a second waiver. And there's nothing that says they have to grant the waiver, but I have seen with good reason penalties and interest being waived.
I can tell you that personally happened to me because I was very surprised, like I said, by the Cleveland municipal income tax when I was living downtown. I got the notice and I said, oh, wow, I really hope I paid these taxes. Thankfully, I did. My employer was withholding it, as I mentioned. And then I had to go through a process and seek fee remission. And they were very cordial about it. They really walked me through the process. It was something that I was able to do on my own with the City of Cleveland Taxation Division. Now, I want to ask you, the city of Cleveland also started sending letters out warning that if the back taxes or fines aren't paid in this situation, residents could potentially be hit with legal action. Is that something that you've heard of before?
I've heard of it. That's actually one of the things that bothers me a little bit about the notices is they send out a first notice. And from my experience, what I've seen is if you don't respond within, say, a couple of weeks, they send out the second notice. And that second notice is the one that's got these big threat of legal action on them. And like after that first message, someone really could have just forgotten, right? And maybe a second reminder would have been fine. That puts a pretty negative tone. But the city's way of recovery is legal. Like it has to go through the court system for them to be able to collect if you don't come forward and pay, and they can make you subject to penalties. And if it goes through a court process, then there's obviously going to be court fees associated with that. So that takes a long time. It's not really in the best interest of either party. The people that work at CCA and RITA even, they're just people too, right? So I think if you get one of these notices, the best thing to do is talk to them, pick up the phone, go down to the office, actually communicate with them. They're usually pretty menial to work with and get a plan under place. If you can't afford the amount that's due, they'll work with you to put a payment plan in place.
We have an email now from Stephen that I want to share. Emails from Stephen says, there needs to be some reliable way for newcomers to Ohio to be informed right away how municipal income taxes work, since Ohio is unusual compared to other states. When I got here, Stephen says, I thought my employer had it handled and had some late fees on my first year. Mary, I'm wondering, do you have any possible suggestions if anyone from the city of Cleveland is listening?
Well, I mean, if you're actually from this area or here, you're obviously hearing the show, so you'd hear about it. So education is really the best way. How to communicate that. I'm not convinced that utility bills were the best way to spread such a message. I don't know, maybe social media these days, right? That's a new way of communication. I know we don't always trust messages coming through social media, especially if it's related to taxes, and we want to be careful about that. But it is a way maybe to reach more people. That's probably like the best idea that I can come up with now that would reach people that are not necessarily working with professionals. So if you're working with a tax professional, most of the tax professionals in our region are pretty familiar with the municipal taxes. But I mean, even I've made mistakes, right? I've had, in the past, I had a client move into a Northeast Ohio region. I saw that their employer was withholding for the city of where their office was. So they happened to live, this individual happened to live in a non-taxing city. So I thought, oh, score, I don't have to file a city tax return for this person. Well, it turns out that office was actually in a non-taxing jurisdiction. It was just that the mailing address was a taxing jurisdiction. The employer had headquarters or a parent company in a different location, a different city. They wanted to follow, or a different state even. They wanted to follow the rules. They were withholding, and in the end, that person didn't even owe the tax. And so we went up back afterwards and requested refunds, basically, for the past years. So,
Which is
it
the
happens.
benefit, right, of working with a
it's
tax
benefit.
professional is you do have that support. All right. Mary Shosmas, thank you very much from Case Western Reserve University. We appreciate the time today.
You're welcome.
All right, that's all the time we have here on The Sound of Ideas today. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts and also on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page. This is The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. We'll see you tomorrow.